We're here on our first day of pre-production of Tomfoolery Saves the Planet. And sitting with me right here is Stryker Delong. She is the costume designer for this romantic steampunk gay-themed musical. And I am so delighted that you're doing this movie with me. This is great. This is our third movie together?
Yes, it is.
Third? Fourth? Let's see, we did Goliath Uprising. We did Abrupt Decision.
Yes,
Yes, that's right. And then I left for Oregon, and you weren't there for that one.
Yeah, well, you left me, what can I say?
I know. However, this is a period piece, and you know, an indie film period piece, that's supposed to be a total don't ever do that. But because I've got my wonderful costume designer with me, it was worth the risk. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you do differently for period pieces that you have to adapt current materials and so forth to work with for that time period, such as fabrics. I mean, do we still have those fabrics that were made in those days?
Of course we still have those fabrics. They were with silks, wools, linens, things like that, and cottons. We still have all those fabrics. We simply don't use them as much today because it's not as cost effective, and we have a tendency to have throwaway clothing today, so we don't really want a t-shirt that's going to last for 6 generations. Whereas back then, if you had a really good shirt, it would be passed down through the generations. So Really, oh yes.
Like made to last.
Yeah, they were made to last. They had to be durable. People only had 1 or 2 shirts.
Wow.
They only had 1 or 2 dresses.
Wow.
The houses back there didn't even have closets in them. You didn't need to store what you didn't have.
So that's why we see these old wardrobe pieces of furniture that nobody knows what to do with. What did they do about, men? Men, we work.
Yeah, so
we're musky.
At that point, things were patched a lot and everybody smelled. It was before we worried about that.
Really?
People had a bath once a week if they were rich, and you were actually, if you lived in the West, you would have next to your skin, you would have a union suit, the long johns. Many times you were actually sewn into those in the fall, and you didn't take them off. I know, really.
You were sewn into your clothes.
You were sewn into them. I mean, you had little flappy things to get the important stuff out when you needed to.
My God.
But you were sewn into them until the spring, and in the spring you would have your spring bath because they thought if you got wet and took a bath in the winter, you'd die of pneumonia. So you didn't take a bath until the spring. And this was out in the West. This wasn't high society and nice back east people. They had, hygiene was a little more important back then. But in the West, you didn't see a lot of people in those mining camps and logging camps and stuff because there were just all a lot of men. There weren't a lot of women to worry about stinking about.
Yeah, which, by the way, a little side note here, Tomfoolery Saves the Planet. My first movie that does not have women. There are a couple in very small, very tiny parts, and I realize that this is so politically incorrect that it's just a movie full of musky, testosterone-driven men.
Yeah, it's going to be real rough.
Who haven't bathed for like what you just said, 6 months, right?
Exactly.
So tell me about the hats. So in the old days, men used to wear hats all the time, didn't they?
Right, they always wore hats. Well, it was to keep you warm. There wasn't a lot of heating and stuff, so you wore hats. Of course, you took them off when you went inside. Really, any kind of felt hat or wool hat. There'd be a lot of wool caps at this point. If you had a wife or sweetheart who knitted, then you would have a wool hat for outside in the winter.
Oh, wow.
And hats also would be passed down. You had straw hats in the summer and wool hats in the winter, and that was if you were rich. Otherwise, you just have one hat all the way through.
Wow.
And it was for warmth.
And you've been finding some hats for us already, is that right?
Yes, we have several hats that we have found.
Okay.
And this is just your basic hat from maybe 15, 20 years ago. In order to make this work, we will, of course, take the hat band off. This will be for someone who is not very rich.
So a woodcutter is an example.
Yes, for a woodcutter, a poor person. We'll take the band out because these would come out first when you were wearing them and they got worn and stuff. These would come out first when the horse stepped on it or something like that. If you were rich, you still had your sweatband in here. If you weren't rich, you didn't have the sweatband in here, and you would have sweat and dirt collecting around this area. So this will have to be distressed a little bit. The hat band will come off. We'll put a darker black around here to make it look like it's been sweated in, and then some brown, make it look like you got drunk and rolled around in the street or something.
Cool.
You know, well, you know, it could happen in a logging town.
Hey, men, we're manly men. Yes, okay,
yes, manly men. So we got
and then
that.
I found this one. It's kind of like a cowboy hat, but
It really is, isn't it great?
but I think it passes for that time period. Doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. We have a tendency of think of everyone out there wearing the cowboy hats that you would think of, you know, Roy Rogers type cowboy hats, but they did not. They were much smaller. The 10-gallon hats were actually used. I mean, there was this whole thing, and part of having the crown point so big was that it helped keep you cool, because there was a lot more space in there for, you know, sweat to be evaporated off inside that little dome that was created. It would also keep you warm in the winter because it would hold in the heat from the top of your head.
Wow.
So the 10-gallon hat actually had a purpose.
Wow. Now, so we've been looking around. So of course we're searching thrift stores to find these clothes, which is a bit of a challenge. So pants being a big issue because there's an issue with belt loops. Did they have belt loops back in 1876?
Yes, they actually did have belt loops during this time, and they would be used. Basically, they were put on in factories. If you had a pair of pants that were made in a factory, you probably would have the belt loops on them, simply because belt loops were made of material, and that was cheaper than buttons. Back then, your suspenders were all held onto your pants with buttons. And buttons were they were bone, they were wood, they were metal, but they were buttons. And the material was much cheaper than a button. So that's when belt loops really started becoming popular.
Really?
Because it was, you know, they would save pennies on every pair of pants that they made if they put belt loops on it rather than buttons.
I actually found at the thrift store,
Yeah.
I found a pair of blue jeans that had the buttons, like the metal buttons, but the size was way too small for anyone in my cast, so I couldn't get them.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Well, actual tailor-made pants would still have the buttons.
They
Rich
would.
people would still have the buttons because the suspenders were classy. You know, gentlemen wore the suspenders because they could afford the buttons. And usually when they got through with their pants, if they were throwing them away, which meant that it was going to someone, you know, in the lower class, they would take the buttons off and reuse them. So you have a lot of, you know, really poor people wearing just like ropes and stuff to keep their pants up because the buttons have been taken off so they could be reused on a pair of rich person's pants.
Wow.
And a lot of times when things were given away to poor people, they took off all the laces and all of the finery, and they would reuse those things.
On another piece of material, clothing.
Right.
So actually in tomfoolery we have 5, 6, 7 gentlemen. So we'll have 7 gentlemen who would be wearing finer clothes. What you would think of the more typical, what you'd see in movies, Wild West. And then we've got a whole group of woodcutters who are, you know, pretty rough and tumble out in the woods. They don't see women, which is why there are no women in the movie.
Another hack is to take a belt.
Yeah.
And you would actually, here, let me show you. You would like attach it to down here. Well, that's backwards. But you would attach it down here to your pants and you would sew it on.
Oh, cool.
And then it would come across to the back here and you'd sew it back there. So it would be like one shoulder.
Really?
Yeah, because it was still easy to take off to do your business.
So just one shoulder is
and then
holding
put
it
back
on.
Right.
Oh, that's
I mean,
cool.
that's a lower class hack that they would use rather than the 2 suspenders or rather than the rope belt or something
Oh,
like
I
that.
love that. So you're going to make sure we have 1 or 2 of those guys.
Yeah,
right?
well, probably this will be starring in the movie. Just because of that.
That is great. So suspenders then.
Yeah.
We found some suspenders.
Yes, suspenders are still used today. Only today we have the little clippy things on here.
Right. Instead of the
Instead of the buttons.
buttons.
However, since we're kind of doing this a little steampunk, so we can take liberties and we can use metal clippy things. And you know what? This is our vision of what it would have been like had we been back there.
That's right. If this world had
Yes.
been created and existed, yes.
Yes,
That's right.
and I was there, and if I was there, there would have been a lot more showering going on. But anyway,
Okay,
So,
great.
yes.
So now we need to talk about shirts because you were telling me that
Shirts,
shirts didn't
yeah.
have collars. Is that right?
they didn't. This is something that also came from the factories and from when the middle class came in. Most shirts at that time were cut off right about here, and there was no collar. This enabled you to wear the shirt all week long as a laborer or in your office or whatever. And then when you went to church on Sunday, you would take the collar out of the drawer, and they had these really stiff cardboard collars, and the collar would button onto it. So you would have a collar and you would have cuffs
Oh, really?
Because, yeah, the cuffs were not attached either. You would add your cuffs and the cufflinks and all that would attach to the shirt. And that way you would have a clean collar and a clean cuff to show outside your coat. So no one would see that you were wearing the same shirt you had been wearing for the past 6 days.
Gotcha.
And this is, once again, because people didn't have a lot of clothing and didn't have a lot of option. Today we have throwaway clothes. You wear a shirt, it gets torn, it gets dirty, you throw it away. Back then you didn't have that option. Number one, in the West, they just weren't there. They were all being made in the factories in the East, and all those ready-made clothes had to be trucked all the way in, you know, on trains and wagon trains and shipped around the Horn and all that stuff. So they were very expensive. So when you got a shirt, you had it for a long time.
Gotcha. So this shirt actually is going to be the shirt worn by the character that I play. So what are you going to do to this shirt?
Well, actually, I'm going to take the collar off. I'll take it off right across there, all the way across, and then I'll attach it to something so that when you dress up, you would put your collar back on. But for everyday wear, you would not have that. You will not have this collar on. And
so when I'm working in the laboratory, I wouldn't have the collar on.
You won't have the collar on.
But when I go into town to try to, win this contract.
Right,
yes,
and it's possible that we'll have the stand-up collar. Put your chin down. Put your chin down, dear.
Sorry,
We'll have the collar standing up, and just the little tips turned over. That was very popular back then among the dandies and the gamblers, and quite that. And so your tie would fit around here, and you would have this like sitting up like that. The tie comes across there.
Cool.
Or it could lay down flat. We'll see how it works with whatever tie we decide to put you in.
Okay.
Great.
And then, of course, there's the other issue, shoes. So we were talking about shoes, and, their shoes now are made out of plastics.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to find a shoe that would be similar to what they would have had back in 1876.
Yeah, I mean, work boots are good. Oh, look, there's a price tag on the bottom there.
Oh, yes,
a little green price tag.
Yeah. I spent money on this. So for those of you who want to know, these boots cost $30.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And they're going to be destroyed in the movie. Now, I mean, there are costs to making these indie films. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So tell me about these boots. Yeah.
I mean, these boots will work well. Back then, the soles could have been a hard rubber sole because they did have the hard rubber back then.
They did.
Yes, rubber came from India, so that was also very expensive. However, the hard rubber soles were more durable than leather soles. So
our woodcutters could theoretically have a rubber sole.
Yeah.
What would they have? I mean, didn't shoes used to be made of like wood in 1700s or something?
Yeah, there were many people who wore wooden shoes, but they're very impractical. They don't work as well. And I don't know. I personally have worn wooden shoes in the snow.
Really?
And yes, well. Live and learn. I have a pair of wooden shoes that were actually hand carved by a friend of mine who does a lot of reenactment and stuff, and he made a small pair for me. And they're very warm in the snow, but the snow sticks to it, so they're very impractical in northern climates, really. So you got to wonder about, over in Holland, all those wooden shoe people,
What are they doing?
Yeah, that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, so we're going to be filming this movie in January, by the way, and because of El Nino, they're predicting that the area where we're filming in Oregon may get deluged, absolutely positively deluged with rain and snow during this time period. So it's going to be a wet movie.
Yeah.
Because, of course, I like challenges. So there could be a lot of snow. If we just go up a little bit higher elevation, it's possible there'll be lots and lots of snow, which I think would be really, really gorgeous, beautiful, and I'll be sure to have lots of hot soup in, thermoses.
I'm more concerned about warm socks and warm and dry socks.
Warm and dry socks, yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for showing us all about the costumes.
Yeah, wow.
I'm looking forward to it. She's here in Oregon for 2 months to make this movie.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming out.
It should be a blast. We'll see.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.